Who would have thought, when ex-LNER number 61572 was withdrawn after a rail tour in 1963, it would not be the end of a class of locomotives which had seen service in East Anglia, the South Coast, and even Aberdeenshire. A proud race of locomotives, the first of which left Stratford Works in 1911, would not go extinct that day. A race that goes by many names. The Great Eastern S69, the 1500, the Hiker, but to most people, they are the Holden B12s. The Great Eastern Railway was, to many, a passenger railway. More specifically, a commuter railway. Its main lines were not very long, resulting in small locomotives being quite suitable for mixed traffic and passenger duties. But the Great Eastern also served places like Ipswich, Harwich, Cambridge, Norwich, and Great Yarmouth. And like any self-respecting railway that served London, they had prime express power to hold these services. From the year 1900 onwards, this prime power took the form of the S46 class, known as Claude Hamilton locomotives. Although further variations of the type eventually led to three classes which were known as Claudes. The Claudes were great locomotives, known for their spacious cabs, free running, and look so majestic they were awarded a medal in the 1900 Paris exhibition. Alas, like with so many express locomotives of the time, it was an increase in trainways that would lead to the construction of new, larger express locomotives capable of handling the loads, with the replacement of the Claudes being drawn up in 1908. At first, the memo was to enlarge the Claude Hamiltons. However, the civil engineers would have seen Chief Mechanical Engineer James Holden hung if such an attempt was to ever right the rails, for the restrictions to the GE network would not have allowed for a locomotive of such a size and axle load. As a locomotive with the 442 wheel arrangement would have insufficient adhesive weight and still only have 4 driven wheels, the next best thing in 1911 was a 460. And what a 460! The class was built as batch S69 at Stratford Works in East London, and they very much are the evolution of the S46 Claudes, mind you, not a pure enlargement. Whilst it is true that the wheel arrangement was larger than the Claudes, having one extra pair of driven wheels, the wheels themselves were a mere 6 foot 6 inch to the S46's 7 feet. The S69 cylinders were larger than the S46 cylinders, at 20 bore by 28 stroke, compared to 19 by 26. The S69's boiler was slightly larger in diameter than the original Claude boiler, but when paired with a commodious cab with the unusually long overhanging roof and a minuscule GER tender, the S69 looked very much larger than it actually was. Here is a Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway 3835 class, later to blossom into the LMS 4F. And here is an S69. As soon as the S69s were pressed into service, they were seen as a success. They could handle the trains that were too heavy for the Claude Hamiltons with ease, without outright replacing their 440 predecessors. Starting off with relieving the Claudes on the Colchester to Norwich expresses, the further production of the S69 saw them hauling all of the heaviest London services. Their forte proved to be the London to Harwich boat trains to Parkston Quay, which was, as far as the Great Eastern was concerned, a very difficult route. However, the success of the S69 will always be attributed to the wrong man. You see, the class are always known as Holden locomotives, as it is always stated that the class was designed by Stephen Dewar Holden. Stephen succeeded his father, James Holden, in 1907. But it was actually Frederick Russell, the chief draftsman at Stratford, who oversaw the design of the S69 from 1908 to 1911, as well as being responsible for the Claude Hamiltons and the unusual Class A55 decapod, and his team's works will forever be attributed to their bosses. Office politics did not stand in the way of the S69's success though, as after Stephen Holden resigned in 1912, by which point only 4 S69s were built, numbers 1500 to 1503, the Great Eastern Railway would roll out another 67 into service, 20 of which were built by William Beardmore & Co. in Glasgow, in order to take some pressure off Stratford Works. Of the 71 built for the Great Eastern Railway, number 1506 was written off after a collision at Colchester in Essex, its boiler and tender being reused on number 1535. And when the Great Eastern was amalgamated into the London and North Eastern Railway in 1923, the S69 would eventually be renumbered by adding 7,000 to their total running numbers, and reclassified as B12. B being the designated letter for locomotives with the 460 wheel arrangement. But shortly after the amalgamation, the Great Eastern section of the LNER was experiencing even greater train loads and worse, poorer quality fuel, and it became clear to management that the B12s were old news. In 1926, the B12s were trialled on the Leeds to Doncaster line, for which they were entirely unsuitable. The bridge tests in Scotland undertaken by number 8526 did give favourable results, but the lack of power on the GE lines meant that it was all hands on deck for the B12s. And when this was realised, the LNER tried to upgrade the B12s. In 1926, number 8509 was fitted with Worthington Simpson feedwater heater equipment, which preheats the water before it is injected into the boiler from the tender. But the next year, the French ACFI feedwater heaters were equipped on a number of B12s, which gave them the nickname of backpackers. The backpacker name is often conflated to be in the same vein as another of the B12's nicknames, hiker, but there are accounts of the hiker name coming from the distance of 8 foot between the tender shoveling plate and the firehole door, which meant that firemen had to use long-handled shovels, else he would be hiking back and forth all day. Another alteration to the B12s by the LNER was the equipment of Len's poppet valve gear, also in 1927. Indeed, according to Oliver Bullied, assistant to LNER's chief mechanical engineer Nigel Gresley, Gresley was very interested in Len's gear from about 1923 onwards, and several Gresley locomotive classes would be built with the Len setup. Still short of motive power for the GE section, 10 more B12s were ordered from Bayer Peacock in Manchester. Originally, the new locomotives for these services would have been 264 express tank engines, but the idea was quickly shelved when, in 1927, a tank engine derailed at speed at Sevenoaks. Watch my video on the N15X class for more context. However, there was some dispute about the timeliness of Gresley's direction to have Bayer Peacock build the B12s with Len's valve gear, causing, and I quote, harsh words and strong letters. The LNER only avoided the charges by paying up half of Bayer Peacock's claim, some £1,500. These new B12s were delivered between August and October of 1928. So it must have been a right shame then when the North British Locomotive Company of Glasgow finally delivered their order for LNER locomotives to be sent to the GE section in November. When the influx of these new locomotives, Class B-17s or Sandringhams, became too great in 1931, a number of B12s were moved to Scotland to work ex-Great North of Scotland Railway main lines, 31 eventually ending up north of the border. The GNSR was a railway that was very much confined to the north-east of Scotland. It dominated Aberdeenshire, Banffshire and the east of Moray, its most westerly offshoot twisting and turning its way to Boat of Garden. And again, small locomotives were quite suitable. When the B12s came to those metals, they were actually used as fast freight locomotives at first, before the LNER realised that was severely underutilising them, and they became mixed traffic locomotives. The primary route these locomotives operated was the Aberdeen-Elgin line, and they were maintained at Inverurie Works, which painted its locomotives black with a signature pattern of lining. 1932 saw the biggest update to the design yet, as under guidance of Edward Thompson, the district manager engineer at Stratford, number 8579 was rebuilt with long travel Stephenson valves and a larger diameter boiler, very similar to the B-17 Sandringhams. This created by far the best known form the B12s would ever have. Further locomotives to be rebuilt to this pattern would be reclassified as B12-3. This subdivision also did away with the ACFI equipment and saw the square Belpaire fireboxes replaced with round-topped examples. Scottish B12s could not be rebuilt into this form, as it would upset the maximum weight limit set on the GNSR lines. The Scottish B12s were the last of all B12s to lose the feed water heaters in 1941, due to the softer water used on the Scottish region making the equipment less vulnerable to wear and tear of cleaning out the scale with acid every few weeks. But, other than that, the most the Scottish B12s ever got were round-topped fireboxes, which made them the class B12/4, though this process did not start until 1943, in other words, during wartime. The war was a time when people and locomotives alike had to show the world what they were made of. In the case of the B12s, their train loads were increased and their maintenance reduced. But after D-Day, when the American forces required locomotives fitted with Westinghouse air brakes capable of running fast over lightly laid lines, the B12/3s were burdened with this task. And they coped. Not necessarily well, but they coped hauling these heavy 500-ton trains along the steeply graded Southern Railway. Sure, a few platforms disagreed with them, requiring the ambulance locomotives to be fitted with different footsteps, but the trains did run. After the conflict, the ambulance B12s were returned to their Great Eastern homes, and when British Railways was formed in 1948, 72 of the 80 inherited by the LNER would be passed into their new, nationalised ownership. From there, the B12 story very much follows the lines of other Edwardian express machines. Either replaced or worn out, these antiquated-looking locomotives were overshadowed by more modern motive power that could do exactly what they could do and more. And although the class saw more use of the East Coast Main Line between London and Edinburgh, some B12/4s would not even be in BR ownership for a year, the final stroke 4s being withdrawn in 1953. A year after went the Belpaire Firebox locomotives B12/1s, locomotives in their original form. Even B12/3s were eliminated pretty much from the start of British Railways. One did not even make it into the BR era. And from 1959 to 1961, there was just one in service, the last B12 among all subdivisions. The locomotive only being saved from the scrapman because the shedmaster had an affinity for this locomotive, the last of her kind. And because he found out the engine did not have a cracked cylinder at all, unlike what the fitter said. This locomotive, as you may know, was number 61572, based out of Norwich Thorpe. Spending her last 2 years on regular Yarmouth March parcels trains and at Norwich to King's Lynn freights, she was a popular candidate for rail tours. Like with many rail tours, the final one would be the grandest. Named the Wandering 1500, calling back to the B12's original numbering scheme, the train would run up from London Broad Street to Rugby and back on the 5th of October 1963. Having been withdrawn in September 1961, 61572 was hastily prepared for running non-stop, but reflective of her nature as an old lady who had been suddenly awakened after 2 years of rest, the train made stops at Bletchley and Watford Junction. After the tour, the Wandering 1500 herself came to Sheringham on what is now the North Norfolk Railway, where after an arduous restoration period, which saw the boiler being overhauled in the Netherlands and the frames in Germany, the locomotive steamed again in late 1994, in her LNER guise as 8572, returning to traffic the following year. And after work on the main line, most notably the steam on the Met runs on the London Underground network, which are now impossible, and overhaul between 2007 and 2012, she was withdrawn for another 10-year boiler ticket overhaul in 2022. Who would have thought, when ex-LNER number 61572 was withdrawn after that rail tour in 1963, it would not be the end of a class of locomotives which had seen service in East Anglia, the South Coast, and even Aberdeenshire. As you may know, I really like the B12s. They are such interesting locomotives, to the point I truly did struggle with finding a way to format this video. I could have gone and told the story of each subdivision one at a time, but that would have made this video even longer than it already is, and I generally aim for TGL episodes to be roughly 7 minutes long anyway. The story of the B12s just has so much going on all at the same time that I am probably going to be very close to the maximum amount of characters one can put in the description with all the sources I've gathered. I would also like to once more apologize for this entry into the TGL playlist taking this long to come out. I have had this script prepared and put on the back burner for so long, and then the Caledonia Works model came out and I just knew now was the time. Hopefully, as of uploading this, I will be very busy with collecting footage for more episodes featuring real locomotives this time. But until those come out, thank you for watching, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of my offerings. Cheerio!